Tonight's shiur Nishmat Avi Marido Ber Meir Nun Halevi Mimaroti Rachel Bat Harav Michael and Chodesh Tov to everybody. Tonight is Rosh Chodesh. We begin the month of Elul tomorrow, and this Shabbos we read the parshat of Shoftim, which has again we're continuing Moshe's teaching of all of the laws. Primarily, the laws of this week's parsha deal almost, I would say exclusively, but primarily with setting up a society that lives by the rules of the Torah, and that involves a lot of the different institutions. We talk about the king, we talk about the judicial system, we talk about the Nevi'im, but we're going to focus tonight on a halacha that everybody knows, but nobody really knows what the source of it is, and we're going to try to see how the Parshanim relate to it. The mitzvah that we know colloquially as Bal Tashchit, which wait a second. Let me just the mitzvah that we call Bal Tashchit, which talks about basically utilizing Hashem's world appropriately. So we'll talk about first. We'll begin with the pasukim that actually relate to this. It's in Perek Chaf. Toward the end of the parsha, we have two psukim, verses 19 and 20, which embody this mitzvah. And it's interesting because this mitzvah is taught to us in the context of being at war. So the mitzvah, pasuk Yutet, tells us the following: Ki tatzur el ir, when you will be besieging a city, yamim rabim, for many days, lilachem aleh, to fight against it, litafsa, to capture it. Lo tashchit et eitzah, you should not destroy its trees. Lindoch alav garzen, to chop them down with a hatchet, hacks, whatever we call an axe or a hatchet. Kimimenu tochel, because from it you shall eat. V'yoto lo tichrot, and therefore you should not cut it down. Ki hadam eitz hasadeh, because man is like the tree of the field. Lavomi panecha, to come before you b'matzor, in a siege. We're going to try to understand what all that means. Rak, however, only eitz asher teda, a tree that you know, ki lo eitz machalhu, that is not a fruit-bearing tree. Otot hashchit v'charatza, that you are allowed to destroy and cut down. Uvanita matzor, and you shall build siege works al ha'ir, upon the city asher hi osa imcha milchama, that is waging war against you, ad ridita, until its downfall. And there are other interpretations of what ridita means, but let's leave it at that for now. Okay, so again, there are a number of things that I said. The key thing here is these two words here that say lo tashchit, which somehow we never refer to the mitzvah as lo tashchit. It's always bal tashchit, which means we should not be destroying things. We should be utilizing things appropriately that Hashem has given us to utilize. Okay, but we'll see as we say how the Parshanim relate to this and the context. So Rashi first tells us that, Yamim means 2 days. Rabim means shlosha, means many days, means 3-day siege. You're fighting a war for 3 days. However, Rashi wants to bring an interesting halacha here. Mikan amru ein sorin ala yarot shel nachrim pachot mishlosh yamim kodem l'shabbat. You cannot start a war against a goyish city less than 3 days before Shabbat. In other words, you don't start wars on Thursday and Friday, or I'm not sure that includes Wednesday also, but you only start a war at the beginning of the week, okay? I'm not sure whether Mr. Trump learned that or not, but that's a whole different story. The Laman, and it teaches us shepoteach b'shalom shnayim o shlosha yamim, that before we wage war against the city, the immediate parsha before this talked about before you wage war against the city, you first give it the opportunity to not fight, to basically surrender, and the surrender upon our terms, which include basically acknowledging that us as owning the territory and accepting the Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach, or accepting the fact that they're going to move somewhere outside of Eretz Yisrael. Those are the conditions. And similarly, it tells us in Shmuel Bet that Vayeshev David b'Siklag Yamim Shnayim, that David was sitting for a couple of days in Siklag. And here, the Torah is only talking about a war that is not a Milchemet Mitzvah. Milchemet Reshut means a war that we are allowed to undertake perhaps to conquer additional territory, or perhaps to subdue enemies who are not directly threatening us, but maybe threatening us long term. But a Milchemet Mitzvah where we are under direct threat or we are conquering Eretz Yisrael, these halachot don't necessarily apply. Ki hadam eitz hasadeh. This phrase that is a man is the tree like a tree of the field. Rashi explains this as meaning hare ki mishamesh b'lashon dilma. Here, this ki means perhaps. So it says perhaps a man is like a tree. Shema hadam eitz hasadeh. Is it possible that perhaps a person is like a tree? Likanes b'toch hamatzor mipanecha. Is the tree going to actively wage war against you? Rashi is saying is the tree going to take the role of a person, that he is going to feel the pains of the siege or not? That he will feel the pangs of hunger and thirst, like the inhabitants of the city. So he's not really involved in this siege, this tree. Lama Tashchit. So Rashi is saying that Ki Adam Eitz Hasadeh is a rhetorical comment saying, why should you destroy the trees? You want to destroy the tree because he's akin to a person waging war against you, and therefore the Torah tells us don't destroy it. Rashi also translates the last phrase, Ad Ridata, you should wage war against the city until Ridata. Rashi says it's not Lashon Yerida, it's not a Lashon of until the city falls to you, but Lashon Ridui, until it is, until you control it. That it should accept your rule over it. That's the purpose of this war that we're waging, is that the city that we are waging war against should accept our sovereignty over it and accept that we are the rulers now. That's the purpose of this war. Rashbam says the following. Why is this whole mitzvah encapsulated in the context of a war? When you will besiege a city, and why do I need trees? You're going to require cutting down trees. Why leave note to build all the siege works? You'll have to build the ramparts, the battering rams, the etc. that require construction. You're going to have to build the whole siege works. There was a whole. If you go back in history, you will find that there was an entire science to siege works and how they were built and how you approach the city and all this other interesting things. But basically, all of those required implements. You required trees to cut them down. Or you required to move the trees that were in the way to put up the siege work. So there are two ways that we can understand this Rashbam, that you need to cut down the trees because you need the resources, but you also need to cut down the trees if they're in the way of building the siege works. So it's both ways Rashbam can be interpreted. Kimimenu tochel, from this tree, this fruit tree you're going to eat, you are going to need these trees to provide food after you conquer the city and you're in control. You want there to be fruit trees because you want to be able to have food. So therefore, you shouldn't destroy the fruit trees. You should therefore not cut them down. Oto eit ma'achal. What type of trees are you allowed to cut down? Rashbam tells us those fruit trees she'eno chozek u'mevatzer le'anshei ha'ir, that don't provide hiding places or strengthen the defenses of the city that is being attacked. If you go in harachokim, like those that are at distance. In other words, those that are not right on the outskirts of the city, but they're a distance from the city, otam lo tichrot, those you should not cut down. So Rashbam is telling us there are a couple of things here in terms of cutting down trees. That we are allowed to cut down trees that are in the way of besieging the city. We're also allowed to cut down any non-fruit trees that we need, whether we need them or don't need them. So the whole point here is that we're not supposed to cut down trees that produce food just for the sake of destroying them. Okay, kol ki sh'acharei lo. Anytime we have the word ki after a negative commandment or after something negative, mitparesh ella is interpreted as ella, but. So it means we should not cut the tree down, but person is like because a person is like a tree. Otolo tichrot. That means you should not cut down these fruit-bearing trees. Ella eitz hasadeh, but the trees that are in the field that are near are lavo hadam mipanecha b'matzar, that a person is going to use to hide or to defend himself during a siege. Ototichros, those that you can cut down, those that are impairing your ability to besiege the city or to capture the city, those you're allowed to cut down. Which are they? Hemakrovim le'ir. Those are those that are close to the city. Shenistarim bahem anshe ha'ir. That the city people inside the city use for camouflage. Haborchim ipnei pivanecha. When they come out to attack you and then they run back, they can hide behind the trees. Ubayim b'toch ha'ir, and through that they can sneak back into the city. As it is written, that they were able to get back into the city even though the city was under siege. They were able to sneak out, attack, and get back in. Ki hadam eitz hasadeh. What does that mean? Ella hadam eitz hasadeh. If the person is a tree of the field, ella eitz hasadeh hadam lavo mipanecha b'matzor. In other words, a tree that of the field that helps the people that is coming to attack you during the siege. These trees that cause a person to be able to get and reach you and attack you, even though they're under siege. Those are the trees you are allowed to destroy. Rak eitz asher teda. However, a tree that you know is non-fruit bearing. Ilan sarak is the term we use for a non-fruit bearing tree. Bein karov la'ir, bein rachok me'ir. Doesn't matter whether it's close into the city or further from the city. Tashchit livnot matzar. You are allowed to destroy when you need the wood to build the siege works, or the wood is in your way, or the tree is in your way to build the siege works. Eitz machal harachok, but a fruit-bearing tree that is far away does not interfere in any way with the siege operations. Lo tichrot. Only those that are close to the city that impede the army from reaching the wall of the city to be able to attack. Eitz asher teda. By the way, in order to be able to cut down, it's eitz asher teda. You have to be sure that you know asher takir. You can recognize from it that it's not a fruit-bearing tree. By the way, it can be a fruit-bearing species tree that's no longer bearing fruit. We're going to see that later on. It doesn't have to be a species that's a non-fruit bearing tree to be able to cut it down, even if it's a non-bearing fruit bearing tree. You know, it's an old tree or it's a sick tree or whatever, you can cut it down. Ad ridita. Now again, as I saw Rashi translated ad ridita, until they are subservient to you. Rashbam says, no, it means ad redet chomotel, until the walls are breached and knocked over. As it says when Moshe is describing the conquest of Eretz Yisrael, he talks about leveling the walls coming down. These high and fortified walls will be destroyed in all of the cities. Chizkuni. It is not a fruit-bearing tree. Here's exactly what I just said. Even if it was once upon a time a fruit-bearing tree, but it's now dried up, you're allowed to cut it down. That's one way of looking at this kilo eitz machalhu. Another way of interpreting this is we have to invert and redefine, recreate the pasuk. If there's a tree in the field that a person will come before during the siege, and if it comes in the place Ella, and Chi is in the place of Ella, that is Ella lo eitz machalhu, Ella v'hakti kamar, and this is the way we should interpret the pasuk. Chizkuni says, lo tichrot, you should not cut down kol eitz machal shebisadeh. All fruit-bearing trees that are out in the field, you don't cut down. Ella, the only ones you can cut down, oto eitz adam shebimatzar yachol livroach mipanecha, a tree that is located at a position where a person who is from the besieged city can escape to ulikanespo and re-enter the city liot kenegdecha, to come and fight against you. And any trees that are impeding you from approaching the wall. Kilomar, as if to teach us, Yar Samuch Li'ir. If there's a whole forest and one near one of the walls of the city, you can destroy that whole forest, even if they're fruit trees. So even fruit-bearing bees that impede the siege, you're allowed to cut down. Rak, however, then the pasuk continues with a tree that you know is not a fruit-bearing tree, even if it's distant from the city. So again, Chayskuni is reinforcing the only trees that you cannot cut down are fruit trees that are distant and are not impairing the military operations in any way, shape, or form. The Lama Nemar Kain, why does it have to tell us specifically that we're allowed to cut down the non-fruit bearing trees? If we have permission to cut down a fruit bearing tree because it's impeding the military operations, then I wouldn't need to tell me that I can cut down a non-fruit bearing tree that's in the way. It came to teach us that a special halacha in law that we can't, through logic, we cannot give somebody a punishment. The Torah doesn't give a punishment unless it's explicitly stated in the Torah. We never give a punishment for something that we have derived logically. Davar acher, another way of interpreting this. Those trees of the field that are distant from the city, that a person can reach, can approach to you, to escape from the siege. There are those places, there are forests or wooded areas where there are trees where the people in the city can use to camouflage their operations that they're doing to try to break the siege. Because they're going to come out of the city to fight against you, and they're going to camouflage it by these trees. That they're able to enter those and hide in them. Even if they're fruit trees, you're allowed to cut them down. If there's a tree that you know is not fruit bearing, you can cut it down even if it's near the city. Tashchit so that you can cut down and destroy l'rabot kol davar, to include everything. Imsofenu l'rabot kol davar. Wait a minute. If the end we're saying you can destroy it, it adds all types of things. Matam lomar kol eitz. Why does it specifically says kol eitz machal, specifically fruit trees? Lomar lecha, to teach us ilan sarak kodem lilan machal. That before we cut down fruit trees for needing wood, we should cut down non-fruit bearing trees if we need the materials. Even if it's a very expensive tree, Talmud Loma Rak, doesn't matter. You could cut it. You should again cut trees down in the order of in the opposite order of their importance. This is how we should be cutting down trees when we need them for a military campaign. Davar acher, another way of looking at this, kamishma is according to its simple explanation. The otolo tichra, you should not cut down these fruit-bearing trees. The lama ki adam eitz hasadeh, because a man is like a tree. Ki koach ha'adam, the strength that a person has, hatzor al ha'ir, who is besieging a city, v'chayav, and his life, heim eitz hasadeh, they are compared to a tree. And why are they compared to a tree? It's similar ki nefesh hu chovel. It means that they're just like they are a living force, so too we require a life force to maintain the siege. Sheperusho, the way we explain this, ki chaye nefesh hu chovel. In other words, the life of this person is dependent on his sustenance, and therefore we have to try to keep all sources of sustenance going. Shal yidei shetochal mimenu. Because again, by eating from this tree, you will be able to continue, keep your strength up during the siege. To be able to come before you during the siege, in order that you will be able to maintain your strength in front of the city until you're able to conquer the city. So again, we see all sorts of different ways of looking at this prohibition. Again, right now, all of these commentaries, we're focusing on the basic prohibition. We're not extending it, as we're going to see a little bit later, that what we explained. It's Ramban. Ki Adam Eitz HaSodeh. Yafa Perish Rav Avram. Ramban quotes or relates to the parish of Ibn Ezra. Ki shiur hakasuv, that the pasuk is appropriate. Kimimenu tochal. This is the way he explains the verse. That kimenu tochal ki adam eitz hasadev yotolo tichrot lavo mipanecha b'motzor. That we should eat from this tree because we need the sustenance, and therefore we shouldn't cut down the tree because we're going to need it again during the siege. The tam, and the reason is ki adam eitz hasadeh. A person is like a tree. Kimo ki nefesh uchovel. Just like other places where we talk about financially harming someone, and we're saying by financially harming them, we are actually affecting their whole existence. There it's talking about taking certain things that a person needs on a day-to-day basis as a pledge that we're not allowed to do because they can no longer provide for their livelihood. Aval al dad raboteno. However, the Gemara in Baba Kama tells us mutar lichrot eitz machal livnot matzor. We are allowed to cut down fruit-bearing trees to build siege works. Below Amra Torah, and the Torah only said eitz asher tedaki lo eitz machalhu. The reason the Torah says we can cut down trees that are not fruit trees, the only reason it wrote that el lahaktim velomar sheilan tzra kodem lilan machal. That when we're cutting down trees to build siege works, or for any other war needs, we should first focus on the non-fruit bearing trees, utilize them first, and only after we've exhausted all of them do we begin to use the fruit bearing trees. Imkain, if that's the case, perish ha-parsha l'datam, the way we explain this parsha according to the Gemara in Baba Kama, she's hira Torah, the Torah is warning us, lo tashchit et eitzah, we should not destroy the trees, lichrot otam derech hashchata, to cut them down simply to destroy them. In other words, the purpose is not to utilize the wood, not for any military purpose, just to destroy the whole area. We're just destroying them, and we don't need them for the siege, and they're not in the way of the siege, and there's no military reason to cut these trees down. We're just cutting them down to destroy them. As many others do during war. We cut off, we destroy everything, and scorched earth policy, as we would say. Now, the reason the Torah doesn't want us to do this, generally, when you're at war, they are destroying around the city, and they're fighting against the city, and they're destroying its neighboring environment so that the people in the city shouldn't be able to use that for their supplies and for their war needs. Inyan Shenemer, as we see when there is a war in Malachim against Moab, they are told, destroy all the trees, and fill up all the water sources. So the whole reason they're doing that in that war and in many other wars, the reason we would go to a scorched earth policy is to make sure that the enemy can no longer use it to supply their needs. However, Hashem tells us, we, Am Yisrael, should not do that when they're waging war. Why? Because we have the promise of Hashem that Hashem will allow us to win the war. We don't have to worry that they are going to use these supplies to defeat us, because Hashem has promised that we will be successful. Adam, and therefore Adam eitz hasadeh, man is like a tree, mimenu tochal, because it is that tree that's going to provide that food, through which we can sustain ourselves. Ubo, and through these trees, the city will fall before us through the siege. Lomar ata techayev imenu. You will survive. You will conquer the city, and you will live from this tree. When you conquer the city, and also even during the siege, you will be able to, since they are under your control, these trees, you will be able to live off of them. So you should not destroy them because they are supplying your needs. The tamo totashtit v'karasa. The reason those non-bearing trees, non-fruit bearing trees, we can cut down. Ki mutar ata lichrot ota livnot hamatzor v'gam lashkito ad bidata. Any trees that you need for military purpose, you're allowed to cut down. Because there'll be times when you will need to destroy trees because they are impairing your ability to conquer the city or to conquer the location. Kigon, for example, that the people of the city are using it to supply their wood. Or they're using it as a cover for their attacks against you. Or the city is using them to build a defensive perimeter. Any of these reasons are reasons you're allowed to cut down the trees. The only reason we're not allowed to cut down them is when they are not fruit-bearing trees and it serves no military purpose to cut them down. That's when you can't cut them down, Ramban says. Okay. It's far enough. Lo tashchit garzen. You should not destroy trees by cutting them down. Lo tashchit ha'etz. You should not destroy the tree kedei lindoch alav garzen mashchit bilvad. Only when you are just cutting it down for the sake of cutting it down. Shelo litzorech. You're cutting it down and it has no military purpose. Elo lahazik livnei ha'ir. All you're trying to do is damage the people in the city. And ultimately, again, you're going to be the one who are going to be in the city. You're going to need these trees. When we destroy the trees only just to destroy them, then it will ingrain within the army this concept of just destruction. When we're not sure we're going to win, and to inhabit this land that you're going to conquer, that is when we destroy things. We destroy things when we're not sure we're going to win, and we don't want them to fall into the hand of the enemy. So therefore, we're just trying to destroy them. Aval ata, but Moshe Rabbeinu is telling you, Am Yisrael, habatuach lichbosh haaretz. Hashem has promised you will conquer the land. Villa shevet ba, and you will come to live there. Ein lachal ashchidei tzmachal. Not only is there no rationale, but we definitely should not want to destroy fruit trees. Because you will eat from them. When you conquer the land. Fake. And there's no doubt that you are going to conquer the land. It's not if you conquer the land, it's when you conquer the land. And you will eat from them. Only if you don't destroy them will you be able to eat from them. So therefore, it behooves you not to destroy them. This Adam who is compared to a tree, this is a rhetorical question. Are the trees like people who are going to come out and fight against you? So Sforno was saying this is a rhetorical question. Are they going to come out and surrender the city on your behalf? Are they fighting against you? The Kivin She'enu came, and since it's obvious, as I said, it's a rhetorical question, obviously not. Then, if it's going to help you defeat the city with certain weaponry and etc., then okay. If you will not, if the purpose of destroying the trees is not for military purpose, although we do have to destroy the people in the city who are fighting against us, we don't have to fight the trees because they're not fighting against us. That's what why Hashem compares Adam to Eitz HaSadeh. That a person is a person like a tree. It's a rhetorical question to say that, yes, we understand the people are fighting against us, but are the trees fighting against us? And when they're being used by the enemy, yes, you have the permission to cut them down. To come against you in the siege. In other words, we need to not cut down the trees so we keep up our energy so that ultimately we will be able to defeat the enemy. and they will come out and ultimately surrender. Abarbanel. Okay, Abarbanel starts with, again, I'm starting in the middle of a mamar. So the next mitzvah that it talks about, is Abarbanel is going to say, Kitatzur el ir, is this mitzvah that we're talking about, Lagid, to tell us, Shaksher yikravu li lachem be'ir, when we come to fight against the city. And first, first, we always call out to the city, do they want to make peace with us? And if they don't want to, and you will be required to besiege this city in order to conquer it. You shouldn't destroy the trees. That is the mitzvah that we're now learning about. It comes to teach us. We should not destroy fruit-bearing trees that are in the city. Like all other armies do, their purpose is scorch earth, to destroy everything. They're not interested in what happens to this territory after they conquer it. They want it to be completely barren. He brings the same pasuk that we saw before. In other words, destroy everything. When you're coming to conquer, to defeat an army, not to conquer a territory, you want scorched earth because you don't want them coming back there again to again fight against you. The Atem, however, when it comes to our fighting for Eretz Yisrael, Atem lo tasu derech hashchata, you should not do it in a destructive manner. Shlo l'tzorach, wanton destruction. Kimin hagamachano, don't act like all other armies. The Natan Hasiba Bazeh, and the reason it gives, you will eat from it, and therefore you shouldn't cut it down. And there are actually two reasons here that are interchanged, that work, that are differing, that work together. The first reason is, Hashem is telling us, you will eat from these trees. Why? This is a great promise Hashem makes to Am Yisrael, that they will be successful in conquering the city, and they'll ultimately eat these fruits. It is not appropriate to destroy them. It's not appropriate that a person should destroy something that is for his own benefit. Why would I want to destroy trees that ultimately I will benefit from? So even if I don't benefit from them right now, because whatever, they may be too close to enemy lines to be able to get to the fruit, or it's not the season where they're bearing fruit right now, they're not going to bear fruit till the next season. Nonetheless, I shouldn't destroy them, because in the future, when I conquer this city and I conquer this territory, I will be in control of these trees, and therefore I should want to keep them going. The second reason Barbanel brings, he amro v'otolo tichrot ki adam eitz hasadeh. You shouldn't cut it down because a man is compared to the tree. Rotzalomar, it tells us the ode, and another reason, hamilchama ein roy shetasol eitzim rak lanashim. When you wage war, it's not appropriate. You should wage war against trees, inanimate objects, which are living objects, but they're not people. We wage war against people. Ki ein roy ligibor shit atzem lilochem neged achalash. It seems inappropriate, Barbanel says, that a person of strength should fight against something that's unable to defend itself. It's a weak thing. It's not something that has the ability to defend itself. The Odzel, and that's why Otot Lo Tichrot, we shouldn't cut it down. Shu eitz. It's a tree. It doesn't have hands to fight. Ki Adam eitz hasadeh. But a person who is a person does fight against us. Rotza Lomar, to say Dilma Adam eitz hasadeh. Again, he's saying it's a rhetorical question. Is a person like a tree? That he's going to come fight against you when you're besieging him? That he's going to be a fear of you? Because you have to destroy it? Ain't okay. It doesn't make sense. A tree is not a person. So again, Barbanel is saying, according to the second interpretation, this concept of Adam Eitz HaSadeh is a rhetorical question. Why do you think that a tree is equivalent to a person that you have to defeat in war? Therefore, it's not appropriate that you should cut it down. Rav Avram, and again, quotes Ibn Ezra, that all of this is one reason that as we saw before, is similar to kinefesh uchovel, that is giving the reason why we should, because we need it, and by cutting it down, we're really harming ourselves. And after the Torah warns us about destroying fruit trees, it allows us to cut down non-fruit trees. That a non-fruit bearing tree we can cut down. Also, Avarnel adds, as we've seen above, that even fruit-bearing trees, natan heter sheyuchal lichrot mehem lo derech hashchata ki im livnot matzor l'shar tzorchei hamilchama. Even not even fruit-bearing trees, the Torah allows us to cut down when it's not just wantonly destroying them, either because they are impeding the military progress or they are needed for other military purposes. And concerning this, it says, you can cut them down to build siege works. Concerning fruit trees, where it does not allow us to wantonly destroy them, but it does not forbid us cutting down fruit trees that we need for military purposes. And it says until they were defeated, from the last two words, ad vidita, that the war should continue until you are successful. The Medrash teaches us that we're even allowed to continue to do this work on Shabbat if the conquest requires us to be involved on Shabbat. That defending ourselves and being at war supersedes Shabbat. Hakatav HaKabbalah. Lo Tashchit lindoach. Now, the phraseology of Kabbalah wants to understand why it says don't destroy by cutting down, instead of just saying, why doesn't it just say, don't cut them down? Why does it have to say, don't destroy them by cutting them down? Lo amar b'kitzur, why didn't it take a shorter language of lo tidach alav garzen? Just don't cut it down don't cut it down. Lehorot, to teach us, she'ein ha'isur levad b'nidichat garzen. The cutting it with chopping it down is not the only thing that's forbidden. In other words, cutting it down by actively cutting it down is not the only thing that's forbidden. Similarly, doing an action that will cause the tree to be destroyed is also asur. As the Medrash teaches us, we cannot cut off an irrigation stream that is watering a fruit tree. In order that the tree should dry out. In order that, see, what we want to do is we want to cut off the tree. We don't want to kill the tree. We want to cut it off so that it won't produce fruit that can be used by the people inside the city. However, even that we're not supposed to do. It should not be cut down. Even if you're not intent to destroy the tree, even if you're only cutting it down, Ktava says exactly the opposite. Even if you're cutting it down to build siege works, so Tava Kabbalah wants to draw a completely different inference here. He says that the whole point here is that even fruit trees are not allowed to be used even for building siege works. Even though the other said if you need it for military purposes, you can. He says no. But Tamo Isur, and the reason it's Asur, she'ein ra'oi l'shamesh b'davar min hanivraim. It is not appropriate to use something that Hashem has created, el hafech hamechuvan mimenu b'briyah, for an opposite purpose than which it has been created. Very interesting theory that Kabbalah says here. As I said, doesn't agree with the parshat we've seen above, who say, yes, I am allowed to cut down fruit trees for military purposes to build siege works. Here he says, you're not. Why? Because I'm not allowed to use something that Hashem created for building to use for destruction. Dugmat Amram, similar to the pasuk teaches al picharbacha hainafta alavat chalev, that we are not allowed to use iron in building the Beit Hamikdash. Why? Or building the Mizbeach. Why? Because a Mizbeach nivral harich yamav shel Adam. The purpose of the altar is to lengthen the days of a person, to bring us closer to Hashem and to help us do tshuva. Varbarzel nivral akatsu yamim shel b'nei Adam. And iron implements were created to destroy, to shorten people's lives through weaponry and other things that we do with iron. So therefore, eino bedin sheyunaf hamikatzer al ha'ma'arich. Therefore, we shouldn't intermix something that shortens people's lives to use it to build something that's going to lengthen people's life. Similarly, a tree that is created for the sake of people to survive, provide sustenance for people, we should not use to build implements of war that are used for destruction and destroying people. Very interesting concept, as I said. It's the only one of the Parshanim who says that fruit trees are not supposed to be used for military purposes. Okay, Al-Shif. Let's go through Al-Shif. He quotes the pasuk. V'tachen Yomar. B'mashin Yizkar Naskir Ma'amar Mazal, and he quotes the Gemara in Bechukot. He wants to bring a very interesting concept here. We notice that it says Ki Adam Eitz Hasadeh. It refers to Adam as Eitz Hasadeh, a tree of the field. Now, Al-Shif wants to make a interesting distinction between the field, the term Eitz Hasadeh and Eitz Haaretz. And he's going to quote from the Gemara, the Psukim in Bechukotai and the Medrash Torah Kohanim there. The Katvu Rashi Zal parshat Bechukotai. The who and the following is Ki bebrachad ne'amar. When it gives us the brachot in parshat Bechukotai, it says Eitz hasadeh yitain piryo, that the trees of the field will provide fruit. Perusho, and Rashi there explains based on this midrash, afilu ilanei sarak, that when Am Yisrael follows the will of Hashem, even non-fruit-bearing trees will provide fruit. Okay, and whether that's in Lati Lava or not, or whether that was in Gan Eden, that all the trees bore fruit, don't know. Ubi klala, but when it comes to give us the klala in Bechukotai, it says Eitz haaretz lo yitain piryo. Even the fruit trees of the land will not provide fruit. Shehu al inyanei ma'achal. And there, when it says Eitz haaretz, it's referring to fruit-bearing trees. So when we don't follow the words of Hashem, even fruit-bearing trees don't provide fruit. When we do follow the will of Hashem, even non-fruit-bearing trees will bear fruit. Very interesting way of looking at this. So we have two different words. Hine, so from here we see, ki elanei sarak, trees that generally do not bear fruit. Yikru atzei hasadeh b'Torah. The Torah refers to as atzei hasadeh, the trees of the field. The Eitz haaretz, when it uses the term Eitz haaretz, it's alanim achal b'lashon Torah. That when the Torah says Eitz haaretz, it's referring to fruit-bearing trees. So here's in our pasuk where it says Eitz hasadeh, it's obviously referring to non-fruit-bearing trees. Okay, so it says in our pasuk, Ki achar sheyesh lacha hana'ah mimenu, ki mimenu tochal. Since we have benefit from these fruit-bearing trees by we eat from them, al kain, therefore, v'yotolo tichrot, we should not cut it down. Why? Gemara has a very interesting principle. Kipir deshatzit binei maya lo tishte bekola. A well that you drank from, that you got water from, don't fill it with earth, with pieces of earth. As Gemara in Baba Kama says, there's a very famous, well-known folk saying, and it's based on, more there brings a pasuk that it's based on. The Shema Tomar, and if perhaps you'll say, don't lead Nachisa, wait a minute, no, I just got to go the other way. Let's interpret this the exact opposite. Why? Ki kol hakarov hakorev el sug adam rachem rachamenu az yoter. The closer in development a creation of Hashem is to a person, the more he requires Hashem's mercy, and the more we should be merciful toward him. The Yim Kain, and therefore, Lama arachem al hatzomeach yotami al ha'adam shu chai midaber kamoni. If I'm here, I'm fighting a war. Who am I fighting against? I'm fighting against other people. I'm not taking pity on the other people. So I would think, Kal v'chomer, I don't have to take pity on the trees. The trees are not as highly developed from Hashem's perspective of increasing levels of sophistication in creation. Trees are not as developed as human beings are. So if I'm fighting a war against human beings, trees should be collateral damage. Shouldn't even matter. Why does it matter? Asks Al-Sheikh. Hello? You're giving me permission to fight against people. Why should I need permission to fight against to be able to destroy trees? Therefore, Hashem says, don't cut down the trees. I'm commanding you. If you're going to ask from, well, how can I fight against people? Eino kushya. That's not a question. Ki adam eitz hasadeh. Because a person is just like a tree. That you are coming to wage war against him. He eitz hasadeh. He's just like a tree. Kilomar be'erkecha. In your estimation, in your evaluation, you've ignored the fact that he's a human being. You're willing to fight against him. Ki eino kachai midaber kim eitz nechshav. L'tzomeach lo le'etz machal. You're not even comparing him to a fruit-bearing tree. You're comparing him to nothing because you want to just destroy him and kill him. He's not even a fruit tree that you're going to get any benefit from. He's only like a non-fruit-bearing tree. You have no benefit that you're going to get from this city that you're waging war against, or the people in the city that you're waging war against. So you can't try to compare him. And halavai mi yiten v'lo yirak hadar to'elet ki im gam hezek. Not only is it holding back that we want by destroying this tree, it's not only are you going to hold something back, you're also going to just damage yourself. Ki alo adam haniskar im trapei yadcha mimenu lo yivtzar mimenu lavo mipanecha machmat panecha. This person who you're fighting against, even if you hold back and you let him live, you're still not going to gain anything from him. Because he's going to come fight against you. So the reason we're fighting against this person is because we know if we allow them to live, they're going to come back and fight against us. So why should I allow them to live? Whereas the tree, that's not going to happen. The tree, I only will get benefit from if I leave it growing. Whereas the people, if I leave these people, I have to fight against them because they're coming to fight against me. And if I don't destroy them, they're going to destroy me. So that's, again, why the trees are in one category, and I shouldn't think that just because it's okay to destroy people, it's okay to destroy the trees. Very interesting concept. Okay, I'm going to close with, we've talked a lot about how all these different parshanim focus on the actual literal meaning of the verse in terms of trees and war and whatever. And I want to pull back a little and go to Rambam in Hilchos Melachim, 6th parak, where he applies this whole concept, gives it a much, much broader interpretation that we are used to understanding of Baal Tashchit. So I'm going to quote the Rambam because that's where I think is the clearest version I found of this. Rambam first quotes the actual halacha. So he says, we're not allowed to cut down fruit trees that are not inside the bound, that are outside the area. And we're not allowed to hold back irrigation channel. We're not allowed to cut off an irrigation channel so that they should dry out. Shenemar, as the verse says, lo tashchita deitzah. V'chol hakotzeitz lo keh. Whoever actually physically, actively cuts down a fruit-bearing tree that is still bearing fruit is punished through malchut. If he gets that, it's a Torah offense to cut down a fruit tree that is still bearing fruit. And if one is warned not to do it, just like any other mitzvah a negative commandment that we transgress, we get malchus, we get lashes. The lo b'matzor bilvad, it's not only talking about during a siege, ela b'chol makom, in any place, in any location, in any time, kol hakotzetz ilan machal derech hashchata. Anyone, now who knows, he adds these two words, anyone who cuts down a fruit tree, derech hashchata, strictly for the purpose of destroying it, loka, gets malchut if he's warned and there are witnesses. Aval, we are allowed to cut down a tree that is harming other trees from growing, or it causes other types of damage in a field, or because its wood is worth more than the fruit is worth, or the location is worth more than this tree is worth. The Torah only told us we're not allowed to do it when it is total destruction. We're just cutting it down for the sake of cutting it down, not because we need the place, not because we need the wood, just because we want to cut it down. That is the Isur according to the Rambam. Now, he goes further. That's, by the way, is first he talks about fruit trees. Now he talks about non-fruit trees. You're allowed to cut down a non-fruit bearing tree even if you have no need for it. If I have a fruit bearing tree that is now old, it only provides a very, very small yield that is not worth the effort involved in collecting it. You're allowed to cut them down also. You can tell how many olives you have to have on your olive tree in order to make it still worthwhile. Rova hakav, a quarter of a kav. Don't ask me how many olives that is. I don't know. But dekel shows a kav tvarim lo yikutzenu. And if you have a date palm tree that has at least a kav of tamarim, you can't cut it down. I don't know what those minimums are. Don't ask me because I'm not in the fruit tree cutting business or the fruit collecting business. However, I'm sure that Rambam that these are amounts that are well known to people who are. Now, finally, in Halacha Yud, Rambam gets to what I will call the well-known, the more colloquial definition of Baal Tashchit. This mitzvah does not apply only to trees. Anybody who breaks any type of utensil, the korea bigodim, or rips up garments, the hores binyan, or tears down a building, the sote mayan, or blocks up a stream, umavid machalot derech hashchata, or destroys food through just destruction. Over below tashchit, he has transgressed this negative mitzvah of lo tashchit. However, all of those things that we just listed in the last mitzvah, Eina Loke, you do not get lashes for Elamakut Mardut Midivrehem. All of these are a rabbinic extension of this mitzvah. So this whole thing that we call Baal Tashchit, according to Rambam at least, is simply a rabbinic extension of the Torah command not to cut down fruit trees. However, having said that, I think that we need to understand that this mitzvah, especially in today's world where we as human beings are doing so many things to destroy Hashem's world just for the sake of destroying them or for the sake of, quote, progress, need to step back and take a very, very hard look individually at how much we waste and throw out, and collectively how much society allows resources to be abused and exploited inappropriately. I'm going to leave it at that and say, again, I think this is one of the more well-known mitzvot. However, it's often misapplied, but then again, it's often unapplied when it should be applied. And I think, unfortunately, especially when it comes to Rambam says ma'aved machalot, when it comes to food waste, I think there's a lot of areas where this does not apply. Obviously, it does not apply if food has already gone to waste. It's already been, it's already beyond its time. And the reality is that a lot of the food production business that we have, the way we generate food, produce food, consume food, and distribute food is so much different in the last century than it had been before that. There's unfortunately is a lot more waste that seemingly could be prevented, but unfortunately is not. I'll leave it at that and open up now for questions, comments, and feedback. Anybody?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Isn't there a line that the Torah is compared to a tree?
The Torah is compared to a tree. Yeah, it's chaim hila machazikim ba. We say that all the time when we're putting the Torah away.
Okay.
The Torah is the tree of life to those. Yes. Go ahead.
So if you compare, you're not allowed to destroy the Torah. How is it that they are allowing you to destroy the trees?
Wait. No, hang on a second. Again, remember, Eitz Chaim Hila Machazim, when we say the Torah is a tree of life, that's talking about the Torah. It's not so. It's comparing it just like a tree gives life. But again, which trees give life? Fruit trees. Non-fruit bearing trees. I mean, they can be helpful because we can use the wood, we can use it for building, we can use it for heat, we can use it for other things. But when it talks about the Torah as an Eitz Chaim, it's telling us that it gives us spiritual life. It's not a physical thing. It's a very good simile because we're comparing the Torah that gives us spiritual sustenance to an eitz, a living tree that provides physical life. But I don't think that is any. I don't think that really gets into this discussion at all. Okay, it's a great question, but I don't think it really applies. It's yes, Torah is compared to a tree, but that's, as I said, from a spiritual nourishment perspective. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Alan.
Hi. And what do we do with civilian infrastructure?
Civilian infrastructure.
Nowadays.
What do we do with civilian infrastructure nowadays? If that civilian infrastructure is in no way harboring military, it has no military purpose whatsoever, then it becomes very challenging to just say, go destroy it. I mean, when go back to World War II and they just were carpet bombing cities just for the sake of destruction. Again, the question is that I'll go to a different one. Let's go to General Sherman and his march across the South, where he burned everything in his path. The purpose there was clearly a psychological purpose to shorten the war. Again, is that a military function? I would say yes, you could argue that it has a military purpose. Again, civilian infrastructure that is used by the military clearly does have military implications. Civilian infrastructure in a non-military area, again, question then becomes a question of, is it going to help defeat the enemy by destroying their will or their desire to continue fighting? Okay, so I would say that yes, destroying civilian infrastructure could very well be a military goal because it destroys the will of the enemy to fight, and especially when you're in a war where the only way to win the war is through regime change. I think that is an unfortunate necessity to destroy civilian infrastructure, because unfortunately that may be the only thing that will cause an uprising that will overthrow the government. Okay?
Interesting.
Any other questions, comments? Alan, go ahead. Alan. Not Alan on the Zoom, Alan in the room. Go ahead. Tava Kabbalah. Okay. Yeah.
It's 21 hours.
We can't hear the question.
1 minute. He hasn't finished. I will try to repeat it when he's finished. Right. Okay. All right. Okay. Alan's question was as follows. I quoted the Ketava Kabbalah, who said that we compare the tree, whose purpose is to sustain humanity, versus to just, and we don't want to use it for a destructive purpose, with the people who we're fighting against. So Alan said, well, wait a minute. Why don't we do it the other way around and say that some of those people are actually not necessarily fighting against us? I think is that the gist of the question? Did I capture the gist of the question? Yeah. Okay, all right. And the answer I'm going to give is that if we go back to I would go to any war prior to let's say, I probably led World War One, somewhere during the 20th century. Competence were competence and non-competence were non-competence, and never the twain did meet. It's only now that we've introduced air power and it becomes much more challenging to identify who are the competents and who are the non-competents, and that's a major challenge, by the way, to try to make sure that you are fighting against the actual enemy rather than those people who happen to be in the enemy camp but don't support the enemy. Very, very challenging in today's day and age. And I can't, as I said, not being in the military strategy position, I would say that's probably one of the biggest challenges the Israeli army faces when it's going into, whether it's Hezbollah territory, Hamas territory, is trying to determine, are there any non-competents? And how do we deal with them? Because it's virtually impossible when you're dealing with the people we are fighting against today to be able to distinguish, because they don't want you to be able to distinguish. That is their entire strategy. Okay, so it's very challenging. Any other questions or comments?
In World War II, there were no non-combatants.
Again, it depends on where you're looking. Okay. And as I said, I can say the same thing about fighting Hamas and fighting Hezbollah also. But I clearly don't think that's the case in Iran. What?
I won't argue.
But I would clearly say that's not the case in Iran, because the civilian population there, I would suggest that there is a significant, possibly even majority of the population that does not support the regime and definitely should be classified as non-competent. Anyway, okay? Any other questions or comments? Thank you all for joining and sharing. I just want to let everybody know that there is a possibility